The stage lights cut through the deep crimson curtains like a cold blade of sunlight. Inside Regentshire Hall, a place where only the greatest names in classical music had ever performed, the selection for Preston Academy of Music carried an oppressive weight of reverence. The jury sat at the center of the hall, directly in front of the stage. At the middle was Arthur Whitmore, a white man in his 60s, his posture as stiff as an ancient, priceless piece of carved wood. Known as the golden hands of European music, Arthur's silver hair was slicked neatly back, exposing a face etched with severity. His thick white brows shadowed cold gray eyes, hard as stone. At 62, he remained the unchallenged authority of Preston, the gatekeeper who decided who would step into the sacred halls of music, and who would forever remain outside its glory. The sound of a piano resonated through the hall, a young female candidate performing a classic Mozart piece. But from the farthest corner, a small movement caught Arthur's attention. A black boy, around 12, sat hunched in the very last row, his posture withdrawn. His white shirt was worn and slightly wrinkled at the cuffs. His brown trousers faded from overuse, yet what struck Arthur wasn't his clothes, but the way the boy tilted his head, ear turned toward the music, as if listening to every vibration in the air. His left hand rested lightly on the seat. His right hand held a white cane. Arthur's lips curled in a faint, mocking smirk. He didn't need to ask, those clouded, milky eyes said it all. A blind black boy. He leaned toward his assistant, lowering his voice just enough for those nearby to hear. "Who's that black kid?" "A candidate, sir," the assistant whispered, uneasily. Arthur let out a sharp scoff, then raised his voice deliberately loud enough for the hall to catch every word.
"A blind boy? And a black one at that? You think you can play piano, kid?"
Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us.
"What are you here for, comic relief?"
The words cracked through the silence like a whip. The hall froze. Some students turned their heads to stare. A few snickered. Someone covered their mouth to hide a laugh. Others looked at the boy with pity or quiet disdain. The boy stood slowly, tapping his cane against the wooden floor with every careful step. Thin, tall, fragile, like a reed in the wind. His natural curls trimmed neatly. His young face dry-lipped and brown as dark honey. "My name is Jerome Ellis, sir," the boy said, voice soft as morning mist, but clear. "I can't see, but I can hear." "Hear?" Arthur's gray eyes narrowed with a dry, cutting tone. "This is a music academy, not a charity house. Listening won't get you anywhere." Jerome lifted his chin slightly, though his eyes stared at nothing. "I'm here to learn, sir. I've never had formal training, but I can play." A murmur spread across the room. "A black kid from nowhere thinks he can play piano? And blind? What a joke." Arthur chuckled dryly, dismissive. He waved his hand lazily. "If you came here to entertain us, then entertain us. Go ahead. Play." It was as much a sentence as it was permission. But Jerome didn't flinch. He bowed his head politely and made his way to the grand piano, his cane tapping, hand tracing along the edge of the stage. Each step echoed through the hall, and gradually the laughter died. A strange tension filled the air. No one knew whether they were about to watch a tragedy or witness something else entirely. Jerome's fingers brushed across the polished keys as if tracing a canvas. Then, he placed both hands on the piano. The first note sounded. It wasn't Mozart, not any piece anyone recognized. It was something entirely his own, a nameless composition beginning with low, pensive chords, like a sigh carried across a desert. The melody wasn't ostentatious, not technically showy, but it bled with emotion like a heart left abandoned whispering its story. Then suddenly, it surged, sharp, broken sequences, like a mirror shattering under truth, raw and unpolished, yet achingly beautiful. A girl near the front gasped, covering her mouth. The sound technician froze, hands suspended in midair. Even Arthur was no longer leaning back. He sat upright, eyes wide. When the last key faded into silence, the hall held its breath. No applause, no sound, Only stunned stillness. Jerome lifted his hands from the keys, head slightly bowed. Arthur rose, his steps deliberate as he walked toward the boy. His eyes glinted, not with warmth, but with something harder to name. He spoke through clenched teeth. "This piece, where did you steal it from? Don't you dare say you wrote it?" Jerome nodded once.
"Yes, sir. I wrote it."
The murmurs rose into a storm. Impossible. He's lying. A blind black boy like him? He stole it, obviously. From the back of the hall, a staff member laughed openly. Of course he didn't write it. His grandmother was a janitor, wasn't she? Probably listened through doors and thought eavesdropping could make him a prodigy. Jerome stayed silent. No defense. No anger. He simply stood there, thin as a matchstick, yet unyielding as a candle refusing to die in the wind. The air inside the hall tightened like an overwound violin string, until Arthur Whitmore suddenly let out a laugh. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was the kind of laugh that bent the mood in his favor, like a conductor snapping his baton to redirect the entire orchestra. "Ah, so that's how it is," he said, stepping toward the boy, his shoes clicking against the polished floor. He patted Jerome's shoulder lightly, almost fatherly. Everyone misunderstood. I misunderstood. I was only too moved by this piece. The crowd murmured, startled. A few exchanged looks. Then cautiously, a handful of people clapped. The applause spread like dry grass catching fire, hesitant, then swelling, as though the hall had just witnessed a miracle they were ashamed to have almost rejected. "This boy deserves to enter Preston Academy," Arthur declared, his voice clear and firm, washing away every cruel whisper from minutes before. Jerome stood still, his face turned toward the empty air. He couldn't see Arthur's eyes, couldn't know that behind the softened words, those cold gray eyes now glinted like a hook hidden in velvet. Arthur leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper only Jerome could hear. "You'll have my favor. Play. Compose from your heart. Don't worry. I'll make you soar, as long as you don't disappoint me." Jerome nodded. In his chest, something fluttered for the first time. He was accepted. No one asked him where he had learned. No one demanded proof. There was only the music. And now, finally, someone believed. The applause swelled, filling the hall. But in the far back, in the shadows where no spotlight reached, a frail woman pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Martha Ellis, Jerome's grandmother, a black woman in her 60s, thin as a coat rack, her graying hair tied in a tight bun. She wore a faded janitor's uniform with wax rubbed white from too many washes. She stood there silently, listening. She had scrubbed the floors of theaters and music halls all her life, sometimes in grand auditoriums like this, sometimes in dingy backstreet venues. She had never trained formally, but in her youth, while mopping rehearsal rooms and emptying backstage trash bins, she would sit by the door, close her eyes, and memorize the music she was never allowed to play. Old sheet music tossed in trash bins. She'd rescue them, piecing together scraps of a world she could never enter. When Jerome was born, blind from birth, she believed it was fate. And when he, at 5 years old, first touched a broken plastic keyboard and crafted a clumsy melody, Martha knew the music she had longed for had found its way to him. She taught Jerome to listen to the world like a symphony. The rain was arpeggios, trains were rhythms. A stranger's sigh was a melancholy bass line. She carved mock piano keys out of scrap wood to teach him fingering. She carried him to music halls to eavesdrop on real pianos. Their one-room apartment had peeling walls and a bed that creaked like an old boat. But in the corner stood their greatest treasure, a second-hand digital piano Martha had bought on installments. After months of skipping meals, every morning she cleaned the academy floors. Every night she brought home stale bread wrapped in old newspaper, half for Jerome's dinner, half tucked away for tomorrow. Her hands were cracked and calloused, but she never once wavered. The dream she had been denied was now his, and she would rather starve than let it be crushed. Jerome had never had a teacher. never performed in public. He lived in darkness but could see sound. Each note had shape, color, weight. No one believed in that but Martha, until today. Until Arthur Whitmore extended his hand. From that day on, Jerome was officially admitted to Preston Academy. Arthur himself declared, "I will personally mentor this boy." Jerome's throat tightened with gratitude. He could almost feel his grandmother's worried hands clasped together outside the hall, her worn-out shoes pointing toward the door. He didn't dare promise anything aloud, but inside, one thought repeated like a mantra: "I have to make this worth it." Arthur arranged for Jerome to stay in a secluded dormitory room behind the academy's main building. "True music doesn't need noise," Arthur told him. "You must keep your soul pure. Don't let the world contaminate you." Jerome agreed instantly. He trusted Arthur. He believed this was the only path. He practiced day and night. The room had nothing but a bed and an old piano. No internet, no social contact, no letters allowed to keep you focused, Arthur said. Jerome wasn't even allowed to see Martha, but Jerome never complained. He believed this was a sacrifice. His fingers blistered, bled, healed, then split open again. He played until his arms trembled, until exhaustion blurred his senses. Yet every time he thought of his grandmother waiting for him, praying lying with her head bent over tired hands, he sat back down at the keys. And outside that small, lonely room, Arthur Whitmore basked in praise. The newspapers called him a genius reborn. The TV hailed his new era of musical brilliance. Prestigious halls across Europe performed his latest works, pieces rich, haunting, and deeply human. No one knew that in a dim corner of Preston Academy, a blind boy worked himself to the bone, crafting those very melodies, living like a ghost. The spring gala of Preston Academy of Music had been advertised for weeks across every major platform. Golden letters stretched across banners at the Academy gates. New composition, special collection curated by Maestro Arthur Whitmore. National television covered it live. The Preston Philharmonic Orchestra provided accompaniment. All the featured performers were hand-picked star pupils, white, polished, glowing under the spotlight like constellations carefully chosen by the gods of music. And far from this dazzling world, one name was missing. No seat reserved. No mention in the program. No applause to his name. Jerome lay curled up in his dark, cramped room several blocks away. His body burned with fever, every breath ragged. His hands, once alive with music, were nothing but brittle twigs now. Sweat soaked through his collar as he lay weak, unable to even sit upright. Arthur Whitmore had sent a letter that morning. "Jerome requires rest due to health concerns. The Academy will preserve his works and hopes to feature them at future events. Please, let him remain undisturbed." But there was one person who didn't believe in rest. Martha Ellis, Jerome's grandmother, sat beside his bed, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, spooning thin broth into his mouth with trembling hands. In the corner, a small, battered TV played the live broadcast of the gala. And when the first notes of the opening piece began, Martha froze. The melody, those unique chords, the emotional progression. She knew them as well as she knew Jerome's heartbeat. The cloth slipped from her fingers. She stood abruptly, grabbed her faded coat, and left the house without another word. That night, Preston Academy glittered like Versailles. Golden light bathed every hedge. Champagne overflowed into crystal glasses. Guests in tuxedos and gowns whispered reverently as they entered. And among them, a frail black woman in worn shoes slipped through a side entrance. "Ma'am, you can't enter without a pass," a security guard said, stepping in front of her. "I need to see Maestro Whitmore. It's urgent. Nothing can interrupt tonight's performance." "It's about the music out there," she snapped, her voice breaking. "The boy who wrote it is sick in bed at home. That's my grandson." Not before she could finish, Arthur Whitmore himself appeared in the corridor. His sharp gray eyes narrowed slightly. "Let her through," he ordered. The guard stepped aside. Martha marched forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Maestro Whitmore!" You stole my grandson's music, used it, gave it to your students, claimed it as yours. Jerome's name isn't even on the roster, is it? Arthur's lips curved into a paper-thin smile. My dear lady, you're causing quite a scene. You know exactly what you did. You locked him away, worked him to exhaustion, and now you erase him to steal his songs? Aren't you afraid of what will happen when this comes to light? Arthur leaned in, his voice dropping to a quiet, icy murmur. You have no proof. You're just a poor black woman with a blind grandson. Who would believe you? Those were his melodies. His soul is in those notes, not yours. Arthur's smile hardened into a sneer. I only care about reputation. Punishment, leave that to people like you. You have the truth, but what will you do with it? Nothing. For the first time that night, his mask slipped. Gone was the kindly maestro image. In its place stood a thief cloaked in a tuxedo. Martha's heart clenched, tears welling. She turned and left, silent except for the soft creak of her worn shoes against the polished floor. She had no idea that, even as she walked away, the storm had already begun, because Arthur Whitmore had forgotten to turn off the microphone clipped to his lapel, a mini recorder a journalist had attached earlier for an interview about his new compositions. The recorder had been running the entire time. Every insult, every racist slur, every confession, all captured, uploaded automatically to the newsroom server. Martha returned to Jerome's bedside. She wiped his fevered forehead gently, whispering, "Hold on, my boy. Grandma won't stay quiet." Meanwhile, Arthur stepped onto the stage minutes later, bowing in triumph beneath blinding lights, convinced he was untouchable. But 15 minutes after the gala ended, while he was still raising a champagne glass backstage, the truth erupted online. A video spread like wildfire, hashtags blazing across social media. Justice for Jerome, stolen melody, black music mattered. Arthur's own voice filled the internet. A poor black woman with a blind grandson. I only care about reputation. Punishment? Leave that to the lowly. You have the truth, but what can you do with it? The applause that had crowned him minutes before now turned into a storm of outrage. For the first time, the truth buried under stolen notes and stage lights rang out like a drum no one could silence. The headlines erupted like funeral bells tolling over a fallen idol. The truth behind the melodies, Maestro Whitmore exposed for plagiarism, racism, and deception. The blind black prodigy erased from the spotlight. Who is the real composer? Justice for Jerome. Nationwide outcry demands justice for the blind piano genius. The backlash hit the music world like a storm. Forums, conservatories, professional panels, everyone was talking. Former admirers of Arthur Whitmore now questioned their own applause. Many admitted with shame, every cheer they had given him had been stolen from a boy forced to live as a ghost. Within 3 days, the Ministry of Culture formed an emergency independent investigation into Preston Academy. Students who had performed at the gala were called to testify. At first, most stayed silent. But finally, a girl with red-rimmed eyes stood up. Whenever Maestro Arthur gave us music, he handed us sheets with no credits, told us to rehearse and perform them. A boy added, voice low but firm. The blind kid, Jerome, he's the one who fixed our phrasing. Suggested harmonies. He could memorize everything after one listen. None of us were half as gifted. One after another, students admitted the truth. Jerome had been the invisible hand behind their best performances, known among them only by Arthur's cruel nicknames, the ghostwriter, the boy with wears for eyes. The investigation's conclusion was damning. Arthur Whitmore had exploited a minor's stolen intellectual property and perpetuated systemic racism within Preston. Preston Academy was shut down indefinitely for a complete ethical and administrative overhaul. Grants were revoked. Professors resigned en masse. The Academy's name, once a symbol of prestige, became a zensum with deception. Arthur's fall was absolute. His honorary titles, royal medals, and innovator accolades were stripped one by one. The International Council of Music declared, We cannot allow a man who deceives students, steals genius, and tramples dignity to stand among true artists. At a late press conference, Arthur managed only one bitter line. I created a wave, and now I'm drowning in it. On the other side of the city, Martha Ellis and Jerome were finally breathing easier. Martha refused interviews. I'm not important. The world should listen to my grandson, she said. But the media couldn't stop celebrating her, the cleaning lady who had raised a prodigy on scraps and unwavering faith. One photo swept across the internet. Martha sitting by Jerome's bedside, holding his hand beside the battered old keyboard covered in scratches, captioned with Jerome's own words, "The first person who taught me to listen to the world with my heart. Jerome Ellis." Jerome recovered slowly from his fever. Then came the biggest surprise. The Aloria International Conservatory, one of the 3 most prestigious music schools in the world, offered him a full scholarship. We are honored to welcome Jerome Ellis, whose extraordinary soul and resilience embody the purest form of artistry. If he accepts, he will join us not as a student, but as an artist. The Academy's secretary personally delivered the letter, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, ma'am, for not letting a genius be buried." Weeks later, Jerome's first official concert was held at Aloria's Grand Hall, a stage reserved for legends. The hall was packed, the tickets emblazoned with Jerome Ellis, piano and soul. No lengthy introduction, no host. The lights dimmed until only a single beam illuminated the Steinway at center stage. Jerome walked out, taller now, his expression calm, his white, sightless eyes unblinking. Every step, though measured, carried the weight of someone who had survived a storm. He sat, placed his hands on the keys, and played. The piece was called Silently. Soft notes poured out like whispered memories, brushing against the audience not with sound, but with feeling. Some closed their eyes, some wept openly. In the front row sat Martha, back straight, hands clasped, tears streaking her face. The woman who had once scrubbed marble steps and memorized melodies behind closed doors now sat beneath golden light, watching her grandson speak to the world with music. Music was once Martha's broken dream. She never learned to play properly, yet memorized entire symphonies with her heart. She couldn't step into that world herself, so she dedicated her life to opening the door for her grandson. For Jerome, music wasn't just sound. It was his only way to touch the world, to shine light inside his darkness. He was the living continuation of her abandoned dream, and she, in turn, his eyes in silent belief. Their story reminds us, the brightest light doesn't always come from grand stages, but from the quiet hands that lift someone else's dream. And sometimes, the dreams denied to one life become the beacon that guides the next.